VikesNow. I am Dustin Baker. We are 3.5 weeks until the 2024 NFL draft, which will be a marvelous climax for the Vikings. I have asked Dallas Robinson from Pro Football Network to join us this week. How are you, kind sir?
I'm doing great. It's free agency's kind of died down. We're fully in draft season. 3 weeks away here. I love it. It's time to discuss all these prospects and fits, and it's the best time of the year.
Indeed. And then the calendar flipped today to April 1st. And that always, to me, kind of feels like a symbolic end to free agency, even though it really petered out last week. I think the second wave is even over. We're going to get into a bunch of Viking stuff. But foremost, you write for PFN. Any place else right now?
Nope, I'm right at PFN. Cover the entire NFL, cover the draft, free agency, and then I do a team specific Bengals podcast with Jay Morrison every week. So if you've got any Cincinnati Bengals fans listening, make sure to check us out on there as well.
Would you classify that as your team, the Bengals?
I would, yeah.
Okay.
I grew up in Cincinnati, so I kind of grew up a Bengals fan and trying to be objective still. Sometimes you're hardest on the team that you grow up covering, I think. So yeah, it is my team, and it's kind of crazy. I get to do a podcast with Jay Morrison, who I grew up reading in high school. So it's been pretty entertaining this past year.
That is sweet. I was there for the Vikings loss to your Bengals. It was my first time in Cincinnati. I did the whole Skyline chili thing, and there's a sweet ice cream chain there that was really good. I can't remember. What it start with an H?
There's Graders. I don't know if it's
Graders.
that one.
Yeah, I went there twice and back-to-back days because it was so delicious. So, all right. Well, what up? Go ahead.
It's been a while since I've been back in Cincinnati, but I'm trying to get back this summer. So you're getting me hungry and getting me looking forward to all this stuff this summer.
The first thing I'm going to ask you is Bengals centric. So, and it should be right in your wheelhouse. What do you think ends up happening with the T. Higgins? I don't know if you call it situation, but just him in general. Should the Bengals consider drafting a wide receiver with a high round pick, or do you think there will be a kumbaya with the Bengals and T. Higgins before we launch into this Viking stuff?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated situation, right? Because I think the right financial move and team building move for the Bengals might be to trade T. Higgins. I mean, I think that might be the right fiscal move. But then you look and see what Brian Burns, who was franchise tagged, what he got. He only got the Panthers a second round pick and a little bit of filler at the end, but basically a second round pick. L'Jarius Sneed, he was franchise tagged by the Chiefs. He got traded for a future third round pick. I think T. Higgins would get more than that if the Bengals were to trade him. I mean, he's young. Wide receivers is a very valuable position, but I don't think the Bengals would get the type of offer that's going to blow them away, that's going to make them sacrifice a player like T. Higgins in a season where the Bengals are going for the Super Bowl. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I think the only way they would even consider moving on is if they were guaranteed to land a guy who could replace him in year one. And to me, I think that's probably Marvin Harrison Jr., Rome Odunze, or Malik Neighbors. And I don't think the Bengals are going to get an offer that allows them access to one of those receivers. So I think unless something changes and unless some other team says we have to have T. Higgins, and part of the problem is too, teams don't want to give you a first round pick just for the right to hand a guy $30 million a year on his next contract, right? So I just don't think that offer is going to be there. That's going to force the Bengals to say, let's move on from T, let's get younger. That doesn't mean I think that the Bengals cannot use an early pick on a wide receiver. They've done this in the past. You saw it when they knew Jesse Bates, a safety, was going to leave in free agency. Who did they draft in the first round the year before? Daxton Hill from Michigan. That hasn't necessarily worked out, but you could see the plan in place there. I'd be very surprised if the Bengals don't use maybe not a round one pick, but rounds 2 and 3. I think that's kind of the wheelhouse where they will try and find that next kind of tag team partner for Jamar Chase, with the idea that T. Higgins will not be here in 2025.
I agree with you on the trade, the part about a new team turning around and having to pay the guy. I think that is the item that drags some of these would-be trade packages down, because when you look at L'Jarius Sneed, there's no way that guy is only worth a third rounder and a late round pick swap. Or even in the Vikings' recent would-be quest for another trade, Justin Jefferson's name is plopped all over the place as like deal sweetener. And for the life of me, I can't understand, like, if you're talking to the Patriots, why he alone wouldn't be worth the third pick himself. But for some reason, I think it has to do with, hey, we have to turn around and pay this guy 30-something million. So I like what you said about trying to gauge these trade prices, because there must be some sort of annoyance or paranoia or something that says, hey, yeah, we're going to have to give Higgins the bag. So we're only going to give you a blah, blah, blah rounder.
Yeah, one of my favorite NFL writers is Bill Barnwell from ESPN. I'm sure a lot of your listeners probably read him. One of the things that he always talks about that sticks with me is that NFL trades are not necessarily about the talent of the player. That's part of it, but it's leverage, right? It's leverage is what drives these trades. The Chiefs just didn't have a lot of negotiating power with L'Jarius Sneed. Everyone knew that they weren't going to re-sign him. Everyone knew they wanted to trade him. I think it's the same thing with T. Higgins. And you add in that this receiver class, like I'm not the biggest draft guru in the world, but everyone knows this wide receiver class in 2024, it should be, it's deep into the mid rounds of wide receiving talent that that teams who might want to find that pass catcher don't feel the need to trade a first or second round pick for T. Higgins and give them that money. They might try and find a younger option in the draft. And I think that NFL teams are finding it easier to find receivers on day one, day two, who can contribute early in their careers. So I think all of that kind of plays into why the Bengals probably aren't going to get the package they're looking for, and thus why T. Higgins, I think, will be a Bengal for at least one more season.
Yeah, I'm there with you. All right, let's switch it to the Vikings a little bit. You wrote an article on PFN last week that argued the Vikings are the best spot for a rookie quarterback per their supporting cast. So let's see. The next question I'm going to ask you for prediction, but this one, which quarterback do you think realistically or is a best fit with the supporting cast led by Kevin O'Connell?
I mean, I think the Vikings would like to get Drake May if they could. I mean, there's that relationship with Josh McCown, obviously. I think Drake May is the second best quarterback in this draft after Caleb Williams. I'd be surprised if most of the NFL doesn't feel that way as well. I mean, now we've heard that some teams have Jaden Daniels higher, some teams might have JJ McCarthy higher, but I think that the Drake May would be the ideal pick for the Vikings. I just don't know if they're going to be able to get to number 2 to do it, because I think the Commanders, obviously, I mean, they would have to take a massive package to move out of that number 2 spot. So then you look down to number 3, and everything you hear coming out of New England, whether that's from Gerard Mayo or Elliott Wolf, who's kind of the de facto general manager now, is that quarterback is the priority. I mean, I think that's obvious. There's no Mac Jones. The Patriots did sign Jacoby Brissett, but there has been a thought that the Patriots could trade out, that they could take Marvin Harrison. Maybe the Vikings could put enough on the table, I think, to maybe move up to number 3. But I'm still pegging, I think, like most people, that number 4 slot. So at that point, I think the Vikings would kind of have to take who's available. I kind of think JJ McCarthy is the better fit for the Vikings offense, though. I really do see him as like kind of point guard quarterback that these guys, these coaches who run some variation of the Shanahan McVay offense, I really do think he's going to be attractive to a lot of those kind of systems. The Vikings obviously run that type of offense. I think JJ McCarthy's got a good arm. He's got kind of underrated mobility. He's a pretty good athlete. He's got all the intangibles I think you could ever want, which coming to a place like Minnesota, which we know is obviously at the top of the NFLPA report card in terms of culture and all the intangible stuff. I think JJ McCarthy from that perspective would be a good fit as well, but also from on field, I think he's a pretty underrated player. I wonder if something happened, the Vikings had a choice between JJ McCarthy or Jaden Daniels at 4. If both of those guys were on the table, who they would take, I think it'd be very interesting. I kind of think it'd be McCarthy. I really do. I think Daniels, like everyone knows, he's this athletic specimen and has high upside, but I really do think McCarthy kind of fits what the Vikings are looking for, maybe more than a Jaden Daniels would.
Yeah, even I've argued on this show, his personality. Like, I tend to believe that humans gravitate towards people who are like themselves. And Kevin O'Connell, known as this eternal optimist, it's kind of like, like his younger brother would be JJ McCarthy, because they're both always happy. The guy had like a happy face on his pro day shirt. And so I think that if there's anything to that, I think that the culture part you talked about, he fit right in. I think it was you, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm sure you've read a bunch of these, a mock draft that had Jaden Daniels to the Vikings from you. Was that correct? Last week?
I've done so many mock drafts that I probably have had that iteration at some point. I'm sure I have. Yeah. I'm sure it's been on there. Yes.
Well, then it doesn't sound like you're absolutely sold on that. You had him at number 4 via the Cardinals, 2 second or 2 first rounders and a 3rd rounder. So either with that as your theory, you've talked about the McCarthy fit. What do you predict? This might be the reason people are tuning in today. As an outsider, how do you think this draft falls? And come April 26th, who's the Vikings rookie quarterback?
I still do kind of think it's going to be Jaden Daniels, despite what I said, only because I think JJ McCarthy will go third. I think the tea leaves are that I'm reading are that JJ McCarthy is going to end up as a Patriot with a number 3 pick. And I think the Vikings will trade up to 4, and I think Jaden Daniels will be the best option there. And I think in my mock draft, yeah, you're right. I think I had pick 11, 23, and a 2025 third, or maybe a current third. I think I'd like to, if I could redo that, I think I'd like to probably have the Vikings sending more. I think it'll probably take 11, 23, probably a 2025 first round pick, and then maybe like a pick swap after that or something like that. But I think if I could revise my mock draft trade, I think I'd bump up that extra pick to maybe a 2025 first rounder. I think it'll be Daniels. I think he will be the 4th guy. And I think I have concerns about Daniels. I mean, everyone knows about the pressure to sack ratio, and that when every time he's pressured, I think on like 50% of his pressures, there's no pass attempted, which is not a great rate. I think he's not a perfect fit. Maybe that McCarthy might be, but I think he's a better fit than Penix. I think he's a better fit than Bo Nix, and certainly a higher upside option than those guys. It's time for the Vikings to get on this rookie quarterback contract path. I think that's what they've been looking for. The Kirk Cousins free agency in combination with his injury kind of gave them that natural breaking point, I think, where they can kind of get this off ramp onto a rookie deal. And even if it's not the guy I think in Daniels that might be the perfect fit, I still think O'Connell and the rest of that offense, I still could see a lot of success even as early as year 1.
Okay, so in terms of ideal fit and realism, you'd put McCarthy on the Vikings. However, you believe in the smoke around him, and therefore, as a prediction, if you had to gamble on it, you would say Daniels at probably number 4.
I'd say I would like McCarthy as the better fit, but if I had to project how the top 4 picks are going to go, I do think it'll go Caleb 1, Drake May 2, JJ McCarthy 3, and then Daniels 4 with the Vikings trading up. If I had to put money on it today, that's how I'd do it. Yeah.
When we talked about JJ McCarthy getting, I mean, this guy was 2nd rounder in December.
Yeah.
And then he won the national championship with the Wolverines, which did wonders for his draft stock. Tell our viewers, how is he different than Will Levis last year or Malik Willis in 2022 in terms of draft hype? Because there's some that are just like, hey, this is just Will Levis all over again. Is that bullshit?
I mean, it's God. I was all in on that too. I mean, I thought Malik Willis was going to be a first round pick. I think a lot of people did until like the day before the draft, right?
Yeah.
I think JJ McCarthy is a much more controlled player than either of those guys, especially Malik Willis. I mean, Malik Willis just does not have a pocket presence whatsoever. I mean, at least when I've seen him in the NFL, when he's gotten some time or in the preseason, I mean, it's a little rough to watch, honestly. He doesn't have a sense of the pocket. Levis, I think, is a very fun player who I think could take a step up with all the weapons and the new coaching staff they have in Tennessee. I think McCarthy's just kind of a more even-keeled player, honestly. He's not – I don't think he's going to have the ups and downs that a Levis gives you. I know everyone remembers that first Will Levis game with 4 touchdowns coming hot out of the gate. There's a lot of ups and downs, and Will Levis can be a roller coaster. I do think McCarthy is a more steady option who can kind of keep it more even-keeled, especially if he lands in a situation like Minnesota, I think, which, as I wrote, it is perfect situation for a rookie quarterback. And I'm not even a big Sam Darnold guy, but I still think he could have success in this Viking system that is so prepared for basically any competent quarterback to come in and have some sort of production. So that's where I'm at. I think that McCarthy, I think maybe he's not in that Caleb Williams, Drake May tier for me, but he's right in that next kind of line that what if he becomes Kirk Cousins? I mean, I think he could. I think at a rookie contract rate, that's an affordable, low cost like solution for the Vikings that could really propel them into this kind of contention window over the next 4 or 5 seasons, while whichever quarterback the Vikings have is making peanuts relatively.
All right. Speaking of Cousins, the last thing I want to ask you, if I recall again correctly, last summer you weren't extraordinarily high on the Vikings like possibilities to do anything. I don't know if that was Cousins based or if that was because they finished 13-4 and flamed out of the postseason. However, with Cousins now on a different team, with the Falcons getting that large deal, 4 years, $180 million, what in the next 1, 2, 3 years is the Falcons' upside? Do you think that they can be good enough to win the chip?
Yeah, so I guess last year my questions on the Vikings were more regression based. It was just they had gotten so lucky the year before. I really saw them like falling back to the mean, which I think in Atlanta it's an interesting case, right? I loved the signing for Atlanta. I mean, I think again, it's a ready-made offense, kind of with an underrated offensive line. They've got good pieces around them that they've used multiple first-round picks on. They signed Darnell Mooney. They acquire Rondale Moore. It's a good situation, but I think there are definitely questions there, right? There's a first-time play caller in Zach Robinson who he's going to bring that kind of Sean McVay offense from the Los Angeles Rams. We think it'll work, but we really don't know. We've never seen Zach Robinson officially call plays. And it's a first-time defensive coordinator too in Jimmy Lake, who's never been a coordinator at the NFL level in any capacity. So even if you like the talent, I think there are questions about how it's going to be deployed. I would pick the Falcons to win the NFC South, no question. I mean, I think it's not a very good division. I would think the Buccaneers are maybe poised to take a step back. I don't know how the Falcons stack up against the rest of an NFC that I think is pretty stacked now, though. I mean, even if you think, obviously the Eagles struggled last year, I'd expect them to take a step back up towards where they were the past couple seasons. Cowboys are still in the mix. Mm-hmm. The entire NFC North feels like it's ascending, right? I mean, Packers, Lions, Bears, 49ers, Rams, Seahawks in the West. It is a stacked conference. So even if you think the Falcons can win 9-10 games and walk away with the NFC South title, which I do, I still kind of have my doubts about whether they're going to be able to break through. I think there's maybe a few missing pieces there. I think they need a big-time edge rusher still, and I think they need help in the secondary. And maybe they'll find that in the draft, and maybe those guys can make impacts in year one, maybe not. I think that filling those couple holes would help, and then I think they would need Kirk Cousins to go on one of these heaters that he can go on, right, and make it the best 3 or 4 game sample of his life. What Joe Flacco did 10 years ago. If that happens, the Falcons can absolutely win a Super Bowl. But I think if you're looking at it kind of rationally, I think they're definitely behind that first tier, maybe even that second tier of those NFC contenders. And I'd put them a little lower in how I view them in the conference.
Yeah, that speech you gave was basically the one that we endorsed for the last 3 or 4 years with Cousins. Hopefully he can go on a playoff heater. Hopefully everybody stays healthy because we know that they're not certifiably as good as the 49ers. So it checks out that would translate to Atlanta. And interestingly, Atlanta should be in a decent spot to draft Dallas Turner. Sure. Looking at how this board is, who should be able to start week 1. And because they've ruled themselves out of drafting a quarterback, they were kind of in the mix before signing Cousins. Obviously, don't need one now. All right, so one more thing, put you on the spot. This draft month, and you do a lot of draft stuff at Pro Football Network. Do you have any draft hot take that you want to inform the world about, or something to look for off the top of your head? Doesn't have to be Vikings, doesn't have to be quarterback, just something that isn't out there too much in the stratosphere.
I don't really know if this is out there or not, but I do think there will be 6 first-round quarterbacks. I think the big 4 absolutely. I think Penix absolutely. In my latest mock draft, I believe I had him going 13th to the Raiders. I think there are just some teams that need quarterbacks so badly that it'll be hard to pass up on a guy who we just saw on a huge stage, go to the NCAA title game and throw consistent deep shots and this amazing high-powered offense. I think it'll be hard for teams to pass on that. And I think Bo Nix will sneak in too. I really do. I don't think his upside is nearly as high as any of these other quarterbacks. And I think the downside is actually pretty low too. Wouldn't be surprised if he falls to round 2. But if I'm making a hot take prediction, I could see a world where all 6 of these guys go in the first round. Maybe that means somebody trading back up into round 1. Maybe the Giants trying to get a quarterback, a successor to Daniel Jones, or somebody comes back in to get that 5th year option. But I do think that 6 quarterbacks will go. And it makes me nervous saying that because we just talked about Malik Willis. And, we've seen quarterbacks get pushed up. And then when the draft comes, they fall to day 2. But I'll go with that we see 6 quarterbacks on day 1.
There's a guy who used to write for Pro Football Focus. And I think he's a Vikings fan or he's either really Vikings focused. His name's Jackson McIntyre. And he did a thread this weekend about Spencer Rattler. And I almost fell out of my chair. He said the part of the thread said he'd be surprised if Rattler didn't go in round 1. And I was like, is that a typo? Do you think that Rattler could be a shock the world, 20-something pick?
I'd say it's a non-zero chance. Yeah, because I know there are people who know much more about the draft and are much better Italian evaluators than I certainly am, who have Rattler above Nix and above Penix and right there with McCarthy. So if there are people in kind of the amateur scouting world who have that view, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some people in the NFL world who have that view. And is there a chance that it he could go in round 1? Sure. I think that if enough teams have him as a day 2 guy, then it might be unwise to take him in round 1 when you
Yeah.
think you could, move back and get him in round 2. But no, nothing would shock me. Honestly, nothing in the draft would shock me because it never turns out how we think. Like it feels like we get into this group think of how these picks are going to go and who's going to go in this spot, and then there's always these massive surprises. So I think Spencer Rattler going round 1, yeah, it would be surprising, but it's not a non-zero chance. No.
Okay. Yeah, I always go back to the Daniel Jones example, going that high to the Giants. It wasn't like, oh, who the hell is this guy? It was that he went that high.
6th, yeah, I know. It was unbelievable. Yeah, I think we could see that again, and I think it makes sense. I mean, how important are rookie quarterbacks and rookie quarterback contracts? I think it makes sense that you push these guys up if you have like any belief in them whatsoever. That there's that obviously that risk, and you're giving up the chance to take somebody maybe you believe in more, but I get it. I get that attractiveness of going for the upside of a young quarterback, even if you have your doubts. I really do.
Especially last year, we kind of had a cliffhanger where guys like Sean Clifford, who I had never heard of, and I had been writing every single day about the draft for like 4 months in a row. And when he got drafted by the Packers, let alone a UDFA. We saw so many quarterbacks last year. I don't know if that's just a new trend, and then perhaps with the Rattler theory, not advanced by you, but yeah, I was trying to wrap my head around that. Did he mean to say round 3? All right, sir. Where do we find you on Twitter?
I am on Twitter at Dallas D Robinson, so please follow me there. Check out everything we got at Pro Football Network. We've got the mock draft simulator now that you can do multi-user simulations. You can do it with your friends. So come check out everything we've got at PFN. Do the MDS. I do like 10 mock drafts every night before bed because I'm obsessed with it. So come and check that out.
Awesome. And then what do you usually get a handful of articles out per week on PFN?
Yeah, writing about everything league-wide, NFL, free agency stuff, moving into the draft now, and and then Jay Morris and I every week do a Cincinnati Bengals PFN podcast, usually on Tuesdays. So getting in the draft season for that. So yeah, come check out everything we're doing over at PFN before the draft.
Wonderful. All right, well, it was great to meet you. We'll probably hit you up after the draft so you can help us do an autopsy on how the Vikings did. Does that sound decent?
Absolutely. Autopsy. Yeah, that's kind of a scary word. Yeah.
Well, when you're a Viking fan, you usually you're thinking about, how are they going to mess this one up?
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, sir. You take it easy and have a wonderful week.
You as well. Thank you so much.
Yep. Later.